You have to remember with number 7 that we're talking about a negative 7y is less than or equal to 14. If I want to get y by itself, the only thing that's different about inequalities and equalities, although I'm still going to do the same step, I'm going to divide by a negative 7, I have to remember that if I multiply or divide by a negative number, that this inequality symbol has to be flipped over. It's going to leave me y is greater than or equal to, and a positive divided by a negative would make a negative 2. Because it can be equal to, that's what this line means on the bottom of it, it would be a filled-in circle on the negative 2. Because it's getting greater than that, we would go to the right. On number 8, we have b over 5, or b divided by 5, is greater than a negative 1. If I want to get the b by itself, I've got to get rid of the division that's down here. The opposite of dividing is? So I multiply both sides by 5. Am I multiplying by a negative? No, I'm multiplying by a positive. So the sign stays the same. These would just cancel out, leaving me b is greater than a negative 5. Because it's not equal to, I can't get to the negative 5. I can get close, but I can't touch it. It has an open circle on it. Because it's getting greater, then I'm going to go to the right. Anything else from that page? Yep. Number 3. If I'm subtracting 7 from both sides, 7 take away 7 is 0. Negative 4 and negative 7 both have the same signs. I keep their sign and I add the two numbers together. 4 plus 7 is 11. I keep their sign, which was negative. It's a negative 11. I do not have to change the sign, the inequality symbol, because I didn't multiply or divide by a negative number. Yes. Right? Different signs here, I subtracted. Same signs here, I added, and I kept their sign. Other questions from this page? Number 2. Number 2 says I'm going to divide both sides by a negative 3. I have to remember that if I'm dividing by a negative, what's going to happen to the inequality symbol? I have to flip it, which is why you'll see the inequality symbol is written as greater than. Negative divided by a negative is going to make a positive. 6 divided by 3 is a positive 2. Negative divided by a negative is going to make a positive again. 3 divided by 3 is 1. And I flipped the inequality because I was dividing both sides by a negative number.
I forgot to flip it.
Okay? Anything else from this page? Number 8. I actually worked it out already. Emery? That's not on this page. On this page. Okay. This is number 9. And I was less worried about the word problems. Again, if you can't do the simple problems, then doing word problems, obviously, we can't do either. For part A, you should have ended up with a negative 4t is greater than or equal to a negative 80. Part B, it'd have to be 20 or fewer hours, and Part C would have to be more than 20 hours.
Is it true if I did the 40 on the other side and the negative 80 on the other side?
So long as your inequality symbol was also flipped. You'd have to make sure that if you're going to put them on the other side, the inequality symbol would have to flip with it. I could have written this. Negative 80 less than or equal to negative 4t. That would also be okay. Okay? Yes. For a scientific experiment, a physicist must make sure that the temperature of the metal at 0 degrees gets no colder than a negative 80. Can it be a negative 80?
No.
It says it gets no colder than a negative 80. Can it be equal to a negative 80? Yes. That's why the equal sign is in my inequality. Can it be less than a negative 80?
Yes.
Can it be less? It has to be what? More. It has to be warmer than a negative 80. That's why the symbol is greater than. I've got to make sure that whatever is happening, that I'm getting greater than a negative 80. And it says 4 degrees per hour. That's why it says a negative 4t. That's where the equation came from. You may. What would I do to solve that equation when I see it like that? Anybody? How would I solve that equation, that inequality? What's happening to the t? And how do I get rid of multiplication? What would I divide by? What's with the variable? What kind of negative 4? What would I divide by? Negative 4. If I divide both sides by a negative 4, it's going to give me t. What do I have to do to this symbol? I have to flip it because I'm dividing by a negative, and negative 80 divided by a negative 4 is going to be 20. 20 or fewer hours. It says t has to be less than or equal to 20.
Is there a line under that greater?
Yes. The physicist has to repeat the experiment if the metal gets cooler than a negative 80. How many hours would the physicist have to cool the metal for this to happen? Obviously, it's going to have to be what? More than 20. Could it be equal to 20 in this case? No, because if it was equal to 20, it would have been okay here. So it can't be equal to 20. It actually has to be more than that. Okay? Am I good? Is greater than. Is less than. Is greater than or equal is less than or equal. And there's actually one more inequality that we don't deal with much. It's this one. And what does that mean? Is not equal. Those are the only inequalities that there are.
Aren't you going to do like build?
What about the equal?
Yeah. Wouldn't the top be filled?
Both of these would be what?
Top open.
Open.
And then the bottom should be filled. But what would be not equal?
This would be closed. This would be open, but the line would go both directions. The line would have to go to the left and to the right, because the only thing it couldn't be is that exact number. That make sense? We just don't deal with not equal to very often. We deal with the others. And the reason it's important to recognize that this is read is greater than is because more than and less than are used in word problems all the time. But more than means that you're adding something, doesn't it? But if I say is more than, that's what makes it an inequality. What word do you see in common in all of these? What do you see in common? Is. By the way, is the word that means equals. So when you're dealing with an inequality, that word is showing you that that's where the equation or inequation is going to take place.
So why isn't there a regular equal sign?
Because it's not an inequality. It is an equality. We talked about equations last module. This time we're not talking about equations. We're not talking about two things that are equal. We're talking about two things that are not equal. So they're either greater, less, greater than, or equal, less than or equal to, or just plain not equal. That help?
What did you say makes you in that?
Okay. There's 10 through 13. 10 was the essential question at the bottom of that page. And it really is important that you are recognizing that under what circumstances you reverse the inequality symbol. And the only time you'd reverse the inequality is when you what? When you multiply or divide by a negative. That's the only time that that inequality symbol is going to be flipped. You're going to reverse it. And then you'll see 11, 12, and 13. And again, you should notice on 11 it's an open circle, 12 it's closed, and 13 is closed. Do I need to go over any of these? Josh? Number 13? You have to remember what I want to do is I want to get that variable completely by itself. And since there's a negative attached to that variable, a negative times a negative is what's going to make it a what? Positive. I know I want to multiply because it's being divided, so I want to multiply by what's in the denominator and that negative to change that q to a positive. When I multiply both sides by a -7, what has to happen to this inequality symbol? I have to flip it. I have to reverse it. This is going to leave me q, and a negative times a negative is going to make a positive. So it says q is less than or equal to 7. I'm going to fill in my circle on 7, which is what you see here, filled in. And because it's getting less, it is going to go to the left. Any of the others? Number 10? Number 10 really is just understanding the rule. The only time, and I do mean the only time, that you have to reverse the inequality, the greater than, the less than, right, is if you multiply or divide by what? A negative number, period. And it's a rule. $11 or $12 for anybody? 12? If I want to get this variable by itself, what would I have to do to get rid of the 193 that's out in front? I'd have to subtract it. It's positive. I've got to use the opposite. It's going to leave me y. If I'm subtracting, do I need to flip the inequality?
Yes. No.
When's the only time I flip it? If I multiply or divide by a negative. When I subtract, it's going to give me 8. The fact that it can be equal to is why it's a closed circle on the 8. And the fact that it's getting greater is why it's going to the right.
Oh wow, I got a -8. I get it. I thought I had like a little weird kind of moment.
Okay.
Because I thought the negative was bigger, and then I just saw it's 201.
So we're okay. Am I good now? There's 14 through 16.
I did my science so early.
16.
I didn't know number 16.
Yeah, it's John asked for 16. But that's okay. By the way, if you have it written this way, it would be the same thing. If you have it written that way. There's nothing wrong with it. Hmm?
Oh, I see. I see what I did wrong already.
But it's still going towards the 8, but like,
I
couldn't you just leave it how it was?
could have left it this way, but did they write it this way? They didn't. If I go to solve this, which I'm going to do, how do I get this y by itself? I multiply by what? 8. When I take 8 times 0.5, or half of 8, I get 4. Because I multiplied by a positive, I did not have to flip my sign. Notice which way it's written. If I just solve it, it's written the way that I wrote it out. Why do you think the book changed it? Why do you think the book wrote it this way?
Wait, I thought it was if you jump to see that we can do it both ways.
Not necessarily.
So you can understand that? I have a question. If you didn't you say if you divide or multiply, then you have to split
By a negative. Only when I multiply or divide by a negative number. Was this negative? I didn't have to do anything with the sum. I'm going to tell you, the book writes it this way because it's common practice to always put the variable on the left side. Somewhere, a teacher told everybody that the arrow always goes the same direction as the inequality symbol. That is only true if the variable is written on the left side. The variable doesn't have to be written there, though, does it? No. That's why I say read from the variable side of the inequality. This says y is getting, is it the big end or the small end? It's the big end of the inequality, so y is getting greater than or equal to 4. I've got to make sure that I'm going to the right. Either way is acceptable. It does not matter which way you write it. You do need to make sure that if you're flipping the way that it's written, notice that the opened end was towards the y. When I rewrote it, guess what? The opened end was still towards what? The y. When you flip something completely around the inequality also has to be flipped. You may. I will do 14. Which one? 15. This is 14. That was for somebody else. Then I'm going to do 15. Okay? What am I going to have to do to get the variable by itself? X is being what? Multiplied. How do I get rid of multiplication? What am I going to divide by? What has to happen to that inequality when I divide by a negative? It has to be flipped. Going to give me a positive x. 60 divided by a negative is going to be negative 5. Because it can't be equal to, it is an open circle. X is on the larger side of the inequality, so x is getting bigger than that negative 5. That is why I'm going to the right, where the numbers get larger. Okay? I can't, I erased it. But I can tell you where you could find it. It's being recorded right now, so it'll be online by the end of the day.
Oh, that'd be creepy. We don't know you be quiet and stuff. I be recorded.
Number 15 says this. 5 is greater than z minus 3. Again, this one could have been written 8 is greater than z. Notice if I flipped the numbers around, what did I also do with the inequality? I flipped it. And the reason I might want to think of it that way is when I went to get this z by itself here, how did I get rid of this negative 3? How do I get rid of subtraction? I don't have to flip the inequality. This becomes 8, and this becomes my z. And notice the way that I wrote it is the same way I'd get it if I solved it. The book is just putting it on the left because that's common practice. It's not a necessity. Okay? You can put it there or not put it there. It is going to be an open circle because it can't be equal to it. Notice that this time Z is on the smaller end of the inequality. So it's saying all the numbers are going to get less than 8, so I have to be going to the left, where the numbers are getting smaller. Are we good? Yes? Kind of go? Okay. There's 17 and 18. Again, a little less worried about the word problems than I am the actual math, because if you can't do the ones that are written out, you obviously can't do the word problems. You should have ended up with at most 16 inches for number 17. And number 18, why do you think it says any non-zero weight here? Yeah, but why? Why couldn't they be 0? Yeah, and what are they talking about? The weight of a what? They're talking about the weight of a kitten. Can one kitten weigh less than 0? It's got to be greater than 0, right? And it's got to be less than what? 24.5 pounds. And they found that by taking 7 times the 3.5. Okay? Yeah, because it says, how many more inches will the puppy grow? And it said, what here? At most. So it can grow at most how many inches? 16 inches. Will it grow 16? Don't know for sure, because it might not grow the full 28 that it can get. It can get 28, right? But it might not make 28. Okay? They're inequalities, so there should be multiple ways to solve it, which is why you see it says at most 16. It could grow what? 1 could grow what? 3, 4, 5, 6, right? All of those are possible, right? Okay. Your assignment is the worksheet today. I'll pass it out in just a second.